Margaret Ellery had spent 31 years stamping due dates on library books in a small town where nobody expected much from anyone. She wore the same cardigan through 3 decades of winters, and she rode the same bicycle to work every single morning. Her co-workers knew her as quiet, reliable, and utterly unremarkable, the kind of person who blended into the background of every staff meeting. What none of them knew was that Margaret had been reading more than just the books she checked out to patrons. Every evening after closing the library doors, she sat at her kitchen table with the day's newspaper and a small notebook filled with numbers. She wasn't reading the headlines or the horoscopes like most of her neighbors. She was studying annual reports, the dense financial documents that companies published once a year and that almost nobody outside Wall Street bothered to read carefully. Margaret had discovered these reports decades earlier while cataloging donated business books for the library's small reference section. Something about the structure of them fascinated her. The balance sheets, the cash flow statements, the footnotes that revealed more than the glossy summaries ever did. She began requesting reports directly from companies, using the library's own return address so no one would think twice about the mail arriving. Her salary was modest, barely enough to cover rent and groceries in a town where wages had stagnated for years. But Margaret had learned something most people never learn, which is that the size of your paycheck matters far less than what you consistently do with it. She started small, setting aside $20 from every paycheck into a brokerage account she opened quietly at a regional bank 2 towns over. She chose companies the way she chose books for the library's collection, patiently, deliberately, and with an eye for what would still matter years down the road. While her colleagues spent their extra income on vacations and new furniture, Margaret kept living exactly as she always had. She clipped coupons, she mended her own clothes, and she never once complained about the modesty of her circumstances. Her sister once asked her why she didn't treat herself to something nice after another difficult year at the library. Margaret simply smiled and said she was already treating herself, just not in a way anyone could see yet. The companies she chose were rarely exciting, the kind of businesses that made insulation, industrial fasteners, or shipping containers. They didn't generate headlines or dinner party conversations, but they generated something Margaret valued far more, which was consistent and growing profit. She read every annual report cover to cover, tracking how management allocated capital and whether they treated shareholders like partners or afterthoughts. If a company borrowed too aggressively or paid its executives lavishly while cutting research budgets, Margaret crossed it off her list without hesitation. She wasn't chasing quick gains or trying to predict which stock would double within a year. She was building something slowly, the way a mason builds a wall, one carefully placed brick at a time, decade after decade. By the time Margaret turned 40, her modest portfolio had grown into something that would have startled anyone who saw her riding that same worn bicycle to work. But nobody saw it, because Margaret never mentioned it, never bragged about it, and never let it change the way she moved through her days. She continued stamping due dates and reshelving returned books with the same quiet diligence she'd shown since her first day on the job. The town around her changed considerably during those years, as the local mill closed and half the storefronts on Main Street eventually stood empty. Families that had once seemed comfortably secure found themselves struggling, their savings evaporated by medical bills or by investments made in a hurry during moments of panic. Margaret watched these hardships unfold with genuine sympathy, never once feeling superior, but also never wavering from the discipline that had carried her this far. She had learned, through years of reading those dense financial reports, that panic was often the single most expensive decision an investor could make. When markets fell sharply, as they did more than once during her working life, Margaret didn't sell. She simply kept buying, using whatever spare money she had to purchase shares in the same steady companies at prices that had suddenly become much cheaper. Her reasoning was simple and almost stubbornly old-fashioned, rooted in the idea that a good business remains a good business, even when its stock price temporarily falls. She had no formal training in finance, no degree from a prestigious university, and no mentor guiding her through the complexities of the market. What she had instead was patience. an almost unshakable patience that seemed to defy the anxious rhythms of the world around her. Colleagues who retired around the same time Margaret began approaching her own retirement often worried aloud about their finances, wondering if their pensions would be enough. Margaret listened to these conversations with quiet compassion, never once revealing the number that had been steadily accumulating in her modest brokerage account for over 3 decades. She wasn't hiding it out of secrecy or shame, but simply because it had never occurred to her that the number needed an audience to be real. To Margaret, the portfolio wasn't a trophy to display or a story to tell at parties. It was simply the natural result of choices made consistently over time. By the time she finally decided to retire from the library, something had happened that nobody in that small town could have possibly anticipated. The quiet woman who rode her bicycle to work every single day, who mended her own cardigans and never once splurged on anything extravagant, had become a millionaire many times over. And the most remarkable part of her story wasn't the number itself, but the fact that it had grown entirely in silence, unnoticed by everyone around her. The number, when it finally surfaced, arrived not through any announcement Margaret made herself, but through a routine visit from an estate planning attorney. She had scheduled the appointment quietly, the way she scheduled everything, wanting to make sure her affairs were in order before she stepped away from the working world entirely. The attorney, a younger man named Dennis, who had handled modest wills and simple property transfers for most of his career, expected the meeting to be brief. He assumed Margaret, given her decades as a small-town librarian, would have a straightforward estate consisting of a paid-off house and perhaps a small savings account. Instead, she slid a folder across his desk containing brokerage statements that spanned back further than his own career had existed. Dennis opened the folder and felt his expression shift as he scanned the columns of numbers, the compounding returns stretching across page after page. The total, when he finally added everything together, came to just over $3.8 million, a figure that seemed almost impossible given the modest cardigan Margaret wore into his office that afternoon. He asked her, carefully and with genuine curiosity, how someone on a librarian's salary had managed to accumulate such extraordinary wealth. Margaret's answer was simple, delivered without any trace of pride or self-congratulation, the same way she might have explained how to properly catalog a rare book. She told him she had simply bought good businesses consistently, held them through every downturn, and never once let fear or excitement dictate her decisions. What Dennis didn't immediately understand, though he would come to appreciate it over the following weeks, was just how much discipline that simple explanation actually concealed. Margaret hadn't merely avoided panic during market crashes, she had used those crashes as opportunities, treating falling prices the way a careful shopper treats a clearance sale. During one particularly brutal recession, when headlines screamed about economic collapse and her neighbors watched their retirement accounts shrink by nearly half, Margaret had continued her modest monthly purchases without interruption. She later told Dennis that fear was the most expensive emotion an investor could indulge, because it convinced people to sell precisely when businesses had become their cheapest and most valuable. This wasn't a strategy she had read about in some sophisticated investment textbook, since Margaret had never taken a single finance course in her entire life. It was a philosophy she had built slowly, report by report, footnote by footnote, sitting at her kitchen table long after the library had closed for the evening. She explained to Dennis that most people treated investing like gambling, chasing whatever seemed exciting at the moment rather than studying what actually generated durable profit. The companies she chose rarely appeared in glossy magazine articles about rising stars, because Margaret had no interest in businesses built on hype or unproven promises. She wanted companies that made things people needed regardless of economic conditions, businesses whose products remained essential whether the economy soared or stumbled. An insulation manufacturer might never inspire excitement at a dinner party, but Margaret understood that homes would always need insulation no matter which political party held power. This unglamorous reasoning had guided nearly every decision she made across 3 decades, and it had rewarded her with a consistency that flashier strategies rarely produced. Dennis found himself asking whether she had ever felt tempted to sell everything and finally enjoy the wealth she had so carefully built. Margaret admitted there had been moments, particularly after her sister passed away, when she wondered if all that discipline had cost her experiences she could never reclaim. She had missed vacations her co-workers took, skipped renovations to her modest home, and declined countless small indulgences that might have made her daily life more comfortable. But she also explained that the process itself had never felt like sacrifice, in the way outsiders assumed, because she genuinely enjoyed the quiet ritual of research and patience. Reading those annual reports each evening wasn't a chore she endured for some distant reward. It was simply how she chose to spend her time, much like others might spend theirs watching television. The compounding wealth had almost become a secondary consequence of a lifestyle she found genuinely fulfilling, rather than the primary goal driving every choice she made. This distinction, subtle as it seemed, turned out to be central to understanding how Margaret had succeeded where so many others with far greater resources had failed. Wealthy clients Dennis had worked with often approached investing with anxious urgency, constantly checking their portfolios and reacting emotionally to every fluctuation in the market. Margaret, by contrast, had built her fortune almost by accident, treating each investment decision as simply another form of careful, patient reading. News of Margaret's wealth eventually spread through the small town, despite her best efforts to keep the matter private, as small towns rarely allow such secrets to remain hidden for long. Former colleagues who had worked alongside her for years expressed a mixture of astonishment and quiet embarrassment, remembering conversations where they had pitied her modest lifestyle. Neighbors who had once viewed her bicycle and threadbare cardigan as signs of financial struggle now saw them as evidence of a discipline they could barely comprehend. Margaret handled this sudden attention with the same steady calm she brought to everything else, neither embarrassed by her past frugality nor eager to suddenly transform her habits. She continued riding her bicycle around town, continued shopping at the same modest grocery store, and continued declining invitations to extravagant gatherings held in her honor. What fascinated Dennis most, as he came to know her better through the estate planning process, was how little her wealth seemed to matter to Margaret personally. She spoke about specific companies with the enthusiasm most people reserved for grandchildren, recalling details about management decisions from 20 years earlier with startling clarity. Her joy had never come from the number itself, but from the intellectual satisfaction of understanding businesses more deeply than the market around her seemed to understand them. This quiet, almost monk-like relationship with money stood in sharp contrast to the anxious, headline-driven behavior Dennis witnessed daily among his other clients. Margaret had discovered something that eluded most investors regardless of their education or resources, which was that patience itself could function as a genuine competitive advantage. While professional fund managers chased quarterly performance and reacted to every piece of breaking news, Margaret had simply kept reading, kept buying, and kept waiting. Word of Margaret's fortune eventually reached beyond the borders of her small town, drawing attention from local business reporters eager to understand how a librarian had quietly outperformed most professional money managers. A reporter named Claire Whitfield contacted her, requesting an interview for a regional newspaper feature about unconventional paths to financial independence. Margaret initially declined, uncomfortable with the idea of becoming a public spectacle after decades of deliberate anonymity. But Claire persisted gently, explaining that Margaret's story might genuinely help ordinary people who felt discouraged by their own modest incomes and limited financial knowledge. Something in that argument resonated with Margaret, who had spent her entire career helping patrons find information that could change their circumstances. She agreed to a single interview on the condition that the article focus on principles rather than specific numbers or personal details. Claire arrived at Margaret's small house expecting a brief conversation, but found herself captivated for hours by the depth of Margaret's understanding. Margaret explained her approach using the same patient clarity she once used to guide confused patrons through complicated reference materials. She described how most people mistakenly believed that building wealth required either a high salary or extraordinary luck, when in reality it required something far more attainable. Consistency, she explained, mattered more than intensity, since a modest amount invested wisely and repeatedly over decades would eventually outperform sporadic bursts of aggressive investing. She also emphasized that avoiding catastrophic mistakes mattered more than achieving spectacular wins, since a single panicked decision during a market crash could erase years of careful progress. Claire asked her directly what she would say to someone who felt it was already too late to start, someone in their 40s or 50s who had never invested a single dollar. Margaret's response was immediate and firm, insisting that the best time to start had been decades earlier. But the second best time was always today. She reminded Claire that compounding, while more powerful over longer periods, still rewarded anyone willing to begin, regardless of their age or starting balance. The published article spread further than either woman expected, eventually reaching readers far beyond the small town where Margaret had spent her entire career. Letters began arriving at the library, addressed simply to Margaret Ellery, from strangers who had read her story and felt inspired to reconsider their own financial habits. A single mother wrote to say she had opened her first brokerage account after reading about Margaret's disciplined approach, starting with just $15 a week. A retired factory worker wrote that he finally understood why he had lost money chasing trendy stocks and had shifted his remaining savings towards steadier, more boring companies. Margaret read every letter carefully, often responding with short handwritten notes, offering encouragement, and occasionally recommending specific types of businesses worth researching. She never charged for advice, never positioned herself as a financial guru, and never strayed from the modest, unassuming identity she had maintained throughout her entire life. When asked by Claire whether she regretted not starting some kind of formal advisory business given her evident success, Margaret simply shook her head. She explained that her satisfaction had never come from teaching others for profit, but from the quiet, personal process of understanding something deeply and applying that understanding consistently. The library eventually renamed its small reference section in her honor, filling the shelves with books on personal finance, economics, and long-term investing principles. Margaret visited that section occasionally after her retirement, watching quietly as young parents and curious teenagers pulled books from shelves that once held only dusty, forgotten volumes. She rarely introduced herself during these visits, content to remain the same unnoticed presence she had been throughout most of her working life. Her story eventually became something of a local legend, retold with growing exaggeration each time it passed between neighbors and newcomers unfamiliar with the original details. Some versions claimed she had inherited hidden wealth, while others insisted she must have received secret tips from a Wall Street relative nobody had ever met. The truth, far less dramatic but infinitely more instructive, remained exactly what she had told Claire during that first lengthy interview. She had simply read carefully, chosen wisely, avoided panic, and allowed decades of patient compounding to accomplish what no single brilliant decision ever could. What made Margaret's story genuinely remarkable wasn't the size of her fortune. Impressive as $3.8 million certainly was for someone on a librarian's modest salary. It was the demonstration that extraordinary financial outcomes didn't require extraordinary circumstances, elite connections, or specialized education most people could never access. They required something available to almost anyone willing to embrace it, a combination of patience, discipline, and the willingness to remain unremarkable while quietly building something remarkable. Margaret Ellery never sought recognition, never chased headlines, and never allowed her growing wealth to alter the fundamental rhythm of her carefully chosen life. She continued riding that same worn bicycle until arthritis finally made the ride too difficult, at which point she simply walked instead, still declining offers of rides from concerned neighbors. Her story spread not because of dramatic market predictions or daring financial maneuvers, but because it proved something simpler and ultimately more powerful than any single clever trade. Wealth, real and lasting wealth, often grows quietest in the hands of people who never intended to be noticed at all.